Welcome to another edition of the Deadhead Cannabis Show. This is Rob Hunt coming to you from Southern California. We will be joined, as always, by our co-host Larry Mishkin in just a few minutes from Mishkin Law in Chicago, Illinois. But today we are also joined by Morris Beegle, who is coming to us from Loveland or Fort Collins, Colorado today. Lovely to have you, Morris, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
So kind of an excited time right now to have you as a guest. I mean, first of all, you're on the hemp side of the industry. We're more on sort of the THC-based cannabis side, although, Larry and I have both done a lot of work in hemp as well. We just had a huge election. We're still waiting to get the final determination. We're waiting to see what happens, and a couple of races haven't been called yet in California, which could take, several weeks. But let's talk about kind of the implications for the industry right now. This certainly wasn't the red wave that everyone was expecting. It certainly wasn't, a 30, 40 seat change in composition, as most midterm elections are to the incumbent president. And we also saw quite a bit of cannabis legislation on the ballot in 5 different states, some that passed, some that didn't. So any thoughts, based on what happened last week in the election cycle?
Well, like you said, we were all kind of expecting this red wave based on all the media hype for the last month or so. And it didn't happen, but it seems like we'll definitely have a Republican, House, and we'll see what happens with the Senate. There's going to be a runoff with the Georgia situation, so we're not even going to know that most likely until December. But I don't know. Our politics have been so bad the last 5 or 6 years. But we're still making progress in the cannabis space. We got 5 states vote for recreational this year, and we had 2 pass. I think we got Missouri and Maryland, and then Arkansas failed, North Dakota failed, and Kristi Noem's land of enchantment, South Dakota, failed. And if it would have passed, she said she would have signed it, but I don't know if I necessarily believe it.
Oh, come on. So she said that last time, too, and then she didn't. We had a whole episode actually on here, saying basically Kristi Noem can go get stuffed. We're not big Kristi Noem fans here in terms of, what she's done in cannabis legalization or legislation. But look, I mean, Maryland's a big one, especially because, there's an outgoing governor in Larry Hogan that was a Republican with an incoming governor who's now a Dem in Maryland. Look, that initiative will definitely go through. They'll definitely be opening up Maryland adult use cannabis relatively quickly. The same thing is true, I think, Missouri. We're going to see it move pretty quickly, despite the fact that Missouri is kind of a dyed-in-the-wool red state. The voters, were pretty clear in that state. The Dakotas, who cares? There's no population there. It doesn't move the needle politically either way. Between the 2 states, there's less than 2 million in total population. As far as an addressable population of cannabis users, that's less than 1 million people. If you talk about who actually uses cannabis, we're talking about a couple 100,000 people. Those markets would have been tiny anyway. It would have been nice to say, we've got 2 more states in the books, but, does it matter the way, a state like Maryland matters, or does it matter the way a state like Missouri matters? Not really. It's more of a figurehead vote, but I mean, look, what are your thoughts as far as, Maryland? What are your thoughts? I mean, these are relatively decent population states.
Well, I'm not surprised that Maryland passed. It's kind of right there in the hub by New Jersey and Washington, D.C. and New York, and that whole side of things. And you got Virginia. Eventually, the East Coast is going to be all recreational. And we'll see about South Carolina. That could be a challenging one. I think North Carolina will go eventually. But I think Maryland's a good win for the industry. It'll be, I don't know what the projections are, what they're going to do annually. I think I saw Missouri, they expect like $900 million a year, first year. But 2 more to add to the books. And, there wasn't any medical on the docket this year, as far as I know, right?
No, it's just the 5 adult use laws that were on the ballot. Again, 2 for 5. Surprisingly, what I'll say is it's rare to see a majority of cannabis legislation not pass in today's day and age. I mean, even in conservative states, it's rare to not see it go through. But again, recreational is a different animal than medicinal. I don't think there's a state in the union where medicinal goes on the ballot and doesn't pass. But for adult use, you get into the more conservative areas, and it's understandable that those are facing a bit of headwinds. I was surprised by Arkansas not going through simply because it's so close to Oklahoma, and Oklahoma right now is as wild west as any state comes. So, do you want to keep that tax revenue internally, or do you want to just basically hand it over to your neighbor who's going to be pumping weight across your border into your state? So, that one seemed to be a little short-sighted, but with Asia Hutchinson, as the governor in that state, doesn't surprise me to see a former drug czar being, pretty anti-cannabis.
Also with that state, I read a fair amount of stuff that the bill itself wasn't a very good bill, and that there was a lot of industry folks that weren't really very supportive of it because of who would be kind of running the show and who could play and who couldn't play. And so I think that there was some issues with the bill itself where a lot of the cannabis folks voted against it. Why legalize when it's going to be a crappy bill?
Yeah, I mean, look, we saw that happen in Ohio, 7-8 years ago?
Yep.
When Legalize Ohio tried to come out and say, we're going to dominate an industry, we're going to do it to the exclusion of everyone else, and no other participants can enter but those of us that actually sponsored the bill to begin with. People see through that. The voters see through that. So agreed, if it's going to be a bad bill, then go back to the drawing board and say, put something on the table that's going to benefit the industry. So not too surprised. I am seeing a lot of headlines today about other states now that think they can move forward with cannabis legalization. Minnesota, came out today saying they're going to put something on the in front of the voters very, very soon, based on the composition now internally of the state house of Minnesota, and they think they can move it forward pretty quickly. So this election, I think, will have a ripple effect outside of just the 5 bills that were in front of voters nationally. But the bigger question is, and we've been talking about this a lot on the show, is what does this mean for SAFE? It looks at this point, it looks like Laxalt's gonna hold on in Nevada. I mean, by the time we actually air this, I think the announcement will come out that Laxalt has held on in Nevada and pick up a seat that basically evens out Fetterman beating Oz in Pennsylvania. At this point, it looks very unlikely that Masters is going to beat Kelly in Arizona. So that's going to keep the composition the same. So really, it just comes down to Georgia, as you said. We're not going to know about that for a while. Georgia's not going to be decided until December the 6th. It's a crapshoot. The Libertarian guy picked up about 2% of the vote in that state. So we're talking about 49.1 versus 48.5. I think was how it's shaping up to look at the end of the original. But the Libertarian vote normally inures to the benefit of the Republicans. But at the same time, if this is a referendum on Trump, which a lot of the pundits on both Fox and the more liberal media are saying, is Trump going to be able to rally the base with his candidate in Walker? But crazy to think that 2 years later, the balance of the Senate now again comes down to Georgia. And if we don't know what's going to happen, the lame duck session of Congress comes back in right after Thanksgiving. And if SAFE is going to pass, does Schumer take that chance? Does Schumer take the chance of losing the Senate, knowing that the House has already lost? I mean, at this point, it's almost a certainty that the House is lost. Does that force the hand in the halls of Congress to say, okay, let's take what we can get right now. Let's take whatever win it is. Let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think it's certainly possible that Schumer's going to go that direction because, like you said, the House is going red. I think that's a foregone conclusion at this point. And if you got a red House, I don't see the Safe Banking Act most likely going through. So I would say that now's the best time to try to pull the trigger and see what can happen.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think if nothing else, we're going to see a transitional period where the committee heads are going to change regardless, right? So, watching guys that, before have been sitting there in the minority that now are taking over, whether it's Jim Jordan at the head of Judiciary or, whether it's, other major changes. I mean, I think the first priority that these guys have coming in is to cause a fair amount of consternation to the Biden administration. It's not going to be about passing legislation. It's going to be about undoing whatever they perceive to be wrongs that are happening right now nationally. Whether it's investigations of Hunter or whether it's investigations of the pullout from Afghanistan, cannabis is not even on that radar for those guys. So if you're going to do it, I'd say now is the time to make a move. And I think you'll actually see a fair amount of people on both sides of the aisle say, yeah, let's just rally to get SAFE done. And I don't think you'll see a tremendous amount of pushback, in the Senate either. So at this point, I'm very, very hopeful for the first time in, the last 7 times that SAFE has passed that we actually get to see it, pass both chambers.
Well, so do you think McConnell will support this? He's been against it pretty much the whole time.
Yeah, he has been, but there's enough support on the Senate side I think at this point that they feel pretty confident that there's enough members of the Republican side that'll compromise on this one and say, okay, for the purposes of safety and supporting law enforcement and all the other things that safe banking would do to allow businesses to be able to be more transparent in electronic transactions, that I think it goes through. I mean, again, to your point, do I think that McConnell would ever support a standalone cannabis bill? Like, his reaction has been, we did the farm bill in 2018, that did hemp. That's as far as I'm prepared to go, and it was already a huge compromise for me. Retroactively, I bet McConnell regrets that decision. I bet he regrets that support. I mean, again, we can shift to hemp here for a second. This is your industry, but I think if McConnell had understood what extraction is and how you can go through the process of work in progress hemp oil and then go through a conversion process of taking CBD isolate and turning into D8 and D9, and ultimately end up with the same product they were trying to prevent for the farm bill, I don't think that he would have supported it. I just don't think they had the information at that time to make an informed decision. But I mean, you're dealing with it all the time in the hemp industry. Like, you guys are now, when I say you guys, your side of the industry is certainly pumping out a lot of psychotropic product into a lot of bodegas around the South, using the farm bill as a shield. And maybe you can speak a little bit more to that right now.
Well, yeah. First, McConnell was very supportive and very instrumental in getting the farm bill passed. He's been very instrumental in helping the hemp industry get going. And while he might not have really understood cannabinoids, which he didn't, he certainly, just like, I don't think really anybody in our industry saw this D8 and all this stuff coming, and it wouldn't have come if the FDA had done their job and regulated CBD as a dietary supplement and a food and beverage additive when the farm bill was passed. Because they didn't, and because we have this ambiguity and we had all this excess biomass because we just overgrew the system, it's sitting around, and you got the guys in the lab saying, hey, look at what we can do. We can take this one molecule and we can convert it into all these other molecules that can, we can convert it to D9, D8, THCO, HHC, and whatever else. And here we are. We've got hemp-derived, psychoactive, intoxicating products out there. And as a hemp guy, as really a fiber and grain guy, somebody who's really an industrial hemp guy, not even a cannabinoid guy. I mean, I certainly support CBD and CBG and all of that stuff as dietary supplements and health products and so forth. I did not see the intoxicating lane coming to the hemp side of things. And I believe that it belongs in the adult use side. And I know that the marijuana industry is not happy about this, but at the same time, it is opening the doors in all these states that don't have legalized adult use cannabis. And there's a way for it to work in harmony with each other where we don't hate each other on these sides of the cannabis plant. I don't know how that's going to all play out, but it's certainly 21 plus product, at least 18 plus product. And maybe there's another lane that goes into smoke shops and it's regulated like Kratom, and Kratom's not even regulated, but it's a confusing side of things at this point in time. And as a hemp guy, it really doesn't belong in our lane. The Farm Bill never intended this. There's a loophole. We're talking 0.3% Delta 9 dry weight. We're not talking a gummy that's got less than 0.3%, THC in it, or Delta 8 or Delta 9 or whatever. I've seen 100 milligram chocolate candy bars that's, hemp derived Delta 9. And it's like, that was never, ever, ever the intention of the Farm Bill.
It's interesting you say that, because I don't think there's any disagreement there. I mean, Larry and I are both attorneys. We've both looked at the language of the Farm Bill very closely. I've had debates with all sorts of other legal scholars in the cannabis space, specifically on this point. And what I'd come back with is, legislative intent ran headfirst into the four corners of the wording. The way they wrote that bill, they might not have had the legislative intent, but unfortunately they opened this door. And now, what I've been seeing, and this is the thing that really surprised me in the last 12 months, because I wrote a white paper on this several years ago, right when the IFR from the DEA came out, trying to walk this back. And my response was, good luck, DEA. That might be what you guys want, but it's not law. What you're saying is what we call dicta. And the law is, hey, inadvertently, you guys just legalized all cannabinoids as derived from hemp. And that was a very unpopular position when I first took it. And now I'm seeing law firms all through the South that are actually putting out legal opinions on letterhead that are supporting that belief and supporting that opinion, saying, hey, look, we've read this thing. If Congress wants to change, the letter of the law, they're free to do so. They can go back there and change what they've drafted. But what they've drafted, legalize THC. Legalize THC in every form. As long as you actually take hemp down at 0.03% by dry weight, whatever happens after that, at that point, it's fully removed, completely removed from the Controlled Substances Act. And once you've bifurcated from the Controlled Substances Act and said that this is legal, and by the way, then the law says, and anything that follows, any isomers, any salts, any derivatives, anything else is all legal as well. Again, it wasn't their intent, but in a practical manner of speaking, and in the way it was drafted, they legalized it that day. And by the way, Scott Gottlieb, who was running the FDA at the time, went in front of Congress and said, you buffoons, do you know what you just did? You just legalized all cannabinoids. And, a couple others took that opinion very quickly, too. The Brookings Institute came out and said the same thing. A few others looked at it and said the same thing. So, when you say that no one really foresaw this happening, I can tell you that I always looked at it from the perspective of what's the aggregate effect of taking down a field of your hemp, hemp that you'd be using for fiber, and say, okay, well, if I were to process that and extract it, there's still a meaningful amount of THC. Even, take away the conversion process from CBD isolate to THC Delta 8, Delta 9, or HHC. And just, think about just how much THC resides, even at 0.03%, in 50 acres of hemp or 100 acres of hemp. There's a ton. Just the way I always use the analogy that if you're in the Kennecott copper mine in Utah, you might be extracting for copper, but there's still plenty of platinum, there's still plenty of gold, there's still plenty of other trace minerals that are in there that aren't getting thrown away. They're going, okay, let's take everything that's in here. So, it's a really interesting question. And again, I'd love to ask you more about your business, but before we do, Larry, how are you? You just joined us. We're here with Morris Beagle, and Morris is coming to us with all sorts of knowledge on the hemp industry. But why don't you say hello?
I will. Thank you, Rob, as always. And Dan, nice to see you. Morris, thank you so much for joining the show. I apologize for being a few minutes late. Little equipment failure on my part, which I remedied by running home to get the computer I forgot to bring to the office. So now I get to do it from home, which is all nice, much more relaxing. But it's wonderful to have you on the show. And, I tuned in right at the point that really is very interesting for me. And that is the purpose of the Farm Bill and what did the government really intend. And I would argue, I don't think there was anything inadvertent about it at all. I think that the information was always there. I think it was a question of whether people really chose to educate themselves on the topic before they voted, like they would anything. And I think that in this instance, this is typical of DC politics at that time and this time as well. That was a time when, with Trump in the White House, the Democrats were loath to allow the Republicans to pass anything if they could stop it. And basically, Mitch McConnell came in and said, yep, we're going to do it, because the folks in Kentucky said to him, don't be a fool, Mitch, this is what we do. And so he said yes, and they put it in there. You have a farm bill that's 2,000 or 3,000 pages long with 2 pages devoted to this? It wouldn't have been that difficult. The evidence all exists. Everybody knows. And I'm not saying that they intended to provide marijuana, higher THC to people as a way around the laws, but best for them, it's sloppy government work. You're finally addressing something that's been illegal forever. You would think that it might deserve at least a few minutes to understand what you're doing and be able to send signals to the industry. I'm sure the same is with you, but I've got many clients who are constantly operating in a state of, well, can we be doing this? Can we not be doing this? They kind of said we could, but then they said we can't. And I imagine for anybody who's trying to sit down and come up with a long-term business plan, it has to be incredibly disruptive.
Yeah, no question.
So you made a really interesting distinction a few minutes ago, which is that you're not on the cannabinoid side of the hemp industry. And I think there's a lot of people out there that don't realize the hemp industry is a lot broader than, cannabinoid based, because all the fanfare recently has gone into cannabinoids. But ultimately, I always think of hemp as, a fiber. I always think of it as, used for all sorts of other materials, whether it's, alternatives to plastics or, hempcrete or clothing or, tell us about what it is that you do in the industry, and tell us about, kind of how you got into it. And please plug your company in the process.
Oh, well, so I started Colorado Hemp Company in 2012. I come from the music industry. I was in the music industry for 25 years, and primarily in the CD business. Did a lot of CD and DVD manufacturing, packaging, distribution. had several record labels, worked with a bunch of record labels, put on shows, did a marketing promotion, managed bands. And the internet basically killed physical media. And once that happened, the digital side of things didn't really cover the physical side of things as far as the losses go. So, cannabis is happening in Colorado. Medical really got rocking in 2009, 2010. The music industry was definitely taking a crap at that point in time. And it's like, where do I want to go? Where do I want to reposition myself? And I didn't really want to get in on the adult use side of marijuana and all of that. It's like when we introduced Amendment 64, is that what it was? Amendment 64? Yeah. Within that legislation, there was an opportunity for Colorado farmers to start growing industrial hemp. So this is pre-2014 Farm Bill. And it's like, I know what hemp clothing is and apparel and cordage and, hemp foods, superfoods, using the seed and hemp oil and protein powder and all this. And so it's like, hey, I'm going to start Colorado Hemp Company. And it was basically started as an apparel company. And we started repping hemp shoes and hemp bags and wallets and stuff like that. And we passed Amendment 64. And it's like, hey, we can start growing hemp here. And a friend of mine, Ryan Laughlin, grew the first hemp crop in a long time here in Colorado. He grew like 54 acres and federally still illegal, but nothing happened to him. And so he grew that in 2013, at which time I also launched another offshoot called Tree Free Hemp, a hemp paper and printing company, which I've been doing paper printing, commercial printing and stuff since the early 90s in the music industry. And it's like, all right, well, we can do business cards and posters and flyers and marketing collateral and so forth. And then I launched NoCo Hemp Expo in 2014, which in turn has become the largest hemp expo in the world. And, the initial thing was based around textiles and what could become building materials and plastics. And, there was a hemp food company out here called Evo Hemp and who was doing superfood energy bars. And that show has grown and grown and grown. But in 2015 is when all of a sudden here come all these CBD companies. And it's like, oh, wow. This is cool. And CBD has certainly dominated the conversation and the revenue stream since everything got going with the 2014 Farm Bill, which, it was a pilot program. Could we commercialize things? There's still some nuance there, but, it didn't stop anybody from taking product to market. And all of a sudden we've got a pretty robust CBD business by the time 2017 rolls around. And then the 2018 Farm Bill, federally legalizes it, takes it off the schedule. And then it's like, we're off to the races. And all of a sudden everybody's growing hemp. There's this huge oversupply thing that starts happening. And, and here we are today with the result of all the oversupply getting converted into products that I didn't see, and most people in the industry didn't see. But I guess, hearing your explanation for how the Farm Bill passed, and, it's 2 pages long, and you could take all the isomers and the derivatives, and, you could certainly convert any of this stuff. And as you said, if you're extracting 50 acres or 300 acres or 500 acres for CBD, and you've got all these leftover compounds, there's certainly plenty of THC in there. And I talked to several people back in 2017, 2018. It's like, how much THC we can get out of this 150 acre field? We can get a lot. And a lot of people were taking that and doing stuff with it back then. And they were taking the smokable hemp flower too and dusting that with shatter long before and selling that as regular legal weed. Well, not legal weed, but black market weed. So, there's been all kinds of stuff going. But back to the question, the fiber side of things for composites and building materials and paper pulps, the grain side of things for human superfoods, energy bars, milks, protein powders. That to me, there's just a huge opportunity in the course of the next 5, 10, 20 years to really implement industrial hemp into multiple industries, multiple supply chains, where it can make a great difference for human health, animal health, planetary health, and so forth.
I agree with that. And I think it's, very astute of you to say it too, because there's far too many people that are just completely focused on the CBD. And, it may have been worthwhile at one point, but it hasn't been for a while. And in fact, here in Illinois, when we go and talk to farmers, about their willingness to grow hemp for commercial purposes, we're getting a lot of pushback. These guys are like, everybody told me I was going to make millions for CBD, and all I know is I got left with acres and acres of nobody wanted to come in and buy my hemp. So now you tell me, oh, I'm going to grow hemp and you're going to use it for something else. Well, how do I know I'm not going to get stuck with a warehouse full of plant that we've harvested and we can't sell it, we can't use it, nobody wants it. And I think it's a slow process to kind of convince them that, look, CBD was great for a while. It was probably overhyped a little bit, but, it certainly worked. And it's not going away. People are always going to want to buy CBD, I imagine. Now the advantage is you can try something new. But one guy's telling me, oh, the seeds for commercial hemp are different, so you have to have different machines to plant your fields, and you have to have, other different considerations. And quite frankly, I'm just not enough of a farmer to be able to talk all of the lingo with them. But I get the concern. But on the other hand, if it's going to be one of those things that's going to really have an ability to take hold again, right? I mean, you probably know hemp as well as anybody. Up until the beginning of the 1900s, it was the major cash crop of this country, and it was used for nobody was using it for CBD back then, at least not as far as we know. Maybe Ben Franklin was smarter than he let on, but otherwise, right? I mean, these people were using hemp for everyday purposes. So if it was good enough for people back at that time, I think that people realize it probably has some application going forward. And when you factor it into the whole ecological movement and, leaving negative footprints and zero carbon footprints, and, people say you can grow enough hemp to make paper to save all the rainforest that's left. We don't have to cut down any more rainforest trees for paper. It sounds great, but, I think that's probably a huge, huge, huge financial undertaking, to really get companies to convert and to get people to prepare it for them the way each company specifically needs it. And again, to find enough farmers to really do it. But like anything else, right? It's going to happen over time.
It's going to happen. And it's not going to be these cannabis horticulture type folks growing it. It's going to be traditional ag, row crop, corn, soy, wheat type farmers that have got hundreds, thousands of acres, co-ops, and it'll be popping up in areas where there's a processor that can do the grain or the fiber, grain and fiber, within 50 to 100 miles of where everything's going to be grown. And you'll have a contract, and I'm going to grow 500 acres of a dual crop. And, the processor is going to take all the grain and they're going to take all the stalks. And in turn, they're going to have contracts, ideally with whatever the construction industry or the paper industry. And that's starting to happen. We're going to have 15 or so industrial hemp processing plants by the middle of next summer. So, we did have 2 decortication units in the U.S. operating like in the last 2 years or 3 years, but now we'll have like 15. And then the following year, we'll have like 30. And so we're going to see an increase in acreage, and that increase in acreage isn't going to be growing for cannabinoids. And as you said, that business is always going to be there, I think. You've got the Charlotte's Webs of the world that are big companies. They just did a $30 million advertising deal over 3 years with Major League Baseball. And, that's a big deal. You got the first real major sports league that says, hey, we'll take your $30 million. Wasn't the NBA, it wasn't the NHL, and it wasn't the NFL. So cannabinoids aren't going away.
And by the way, it was instantaneous. If you look during the World Series, you actually saw the Charlotte's Web logo in the bullpen. So, they started that campaign immediately following the announcement. There was no lag there.
And, they found the CBD market has found its way into the natural products market. And if you go to Expo East or Expo West, which I go to both of those, and you'll find 15, 20, 30 CBD companies there. And while it's not what it was in 2018 and 2019 with all the hype, that stuff's still there. And still a lot of the big companies have backed off, and they're not touching it until the FDA does something. And hopefully they're going to. I mean, I just got off the phone with Jonathan Miller today, and I'm sure you know Jonathan from the U.S. Hemp Roundtable. And they've been up there on Capitol Hill working on this for years. And they're optimistic something's going to happen in the next 12 to 24 months, but, we'll see.
It's like we were just saying before, right? They almost stumble into this without even knowing what they're doing. Now, I would take exception, I think, with, saying that, previously before the Farm Bill it had been federally illegal. I think that there was a very strong argument. And Rob, I think that ties into the argument you were making, because that case came up before 2018. originally with the DEA.
The HIAA, the Hemp Industry Association of America lawsuit.
Right. It wasn't one of the arguments that, under current definitions, hemp should not even be considered federally illegal. I'm not going to argue with them because now they've agreed and said it is federally illegal. But, that's part of the bigger problem here is that, again, you've got a government that realizes that public sentiment is such that it's got to do something, but they're not really quite interested enough to do it all the way and to just make these decisions once and for all. So it can be very limiting to people who are the pioneers and the groundbreakers, like you and the folks that come to your conferences, because the DEA, the FDA, what is the FDA screwing around with this for? You can't sell edibles because we haven't determined if CBD is safe for human consumption. They act as though it just appeared on the earth, the day the Farm Bill was signed, like it had never been around. It's ridiculous.
Right. Well, we going back to like the 1900s, 1800s, there were cannabis tinctures all over the place. And it wasn't just like THC was the only compound in there. There's 100 cannabinoids or whatever there is in it. And so CBD's been consumed by humans for a long time in some capacity. And so for human safety, I mean, what is it going to take to really cause liver damage? And does that, 5,000 milligrams in a day on a regular basis? I mean, if you're taking 100 milligrams a day, if you're drinking a beverage that has it, you're eating a candy bar that has it, you're taking a tincture that has it and a capsule, and you're putting some topicals on. I think the World Health Organization already said that there's just a very, very low opportunity for any sort of toxicity, and it's safe. But yet the FDA is like, well, we don't have the data yet. Okay.
They don't have their data yet. It exists all over the world. They don't want to talk about it.
Right. Yeah. Go to Israel. It's there.
Right.
Yeah.
We've been joking about that for a long time, where it's, an anecdotal evidence perspective. Well, even look at, how many years people have been consuming cannabis throughout the world for, if there were major issues associated with the consumption of cannabis or cannabinoids or hemp, it would have long ago exposed itself naturally. That, every doctor out there would say, oh yeah, you can't, that stay away from that plant. It's toxic. I mean, I think we've learned as humans over, millennia, which plants you don't eat, which plants you don't smoke, which plants you don't use because of toxicity levels. I don't think I need, the FDA to tell me that.
Right. I agree. Because the pharmaceutical industry is telling them what to say in the first place, oftentimes.
But that's another whole issue. And that's one that, you've obviously been dealing with in the hemp industry. And you alluded to it earlier with CBD, that the second CBD was considered to be an approved pharmaceutical ingredient, an API, specifically for Epidiolex with GW Pharma, which is now Jazz Pharmaceuticals, a very powerful group. Then instantaneously that was taken off the list of what could be used as a supplement or a dietary supplement or a food additive, which is insane that you can't straddle both sides of the line. Just because something's got medicinal benefit doesn't mean it shouldn't be able to have some sort of benefit holistically as well. And that kind of goes back to like, okay, is this the supplements industry, which is like an unregulated industry, or is it the pharmaceutical industry? My question is, are there not times where it can be both? I mean, there's certainly no doubt based on, not just anecdotal, but empirical evidence that really, really high doses of CBD have proven to be, hugely beneficial from a medical perspective with relation to spasticity, right? Like Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut and Parkinson's, et cetera. But that doesn't mean that, a fair portion of CBD, significantly less, might not be very helpful for sleeping or for other things that people want to use it for. So does it have to be only sold across the counter with a prescription, or can it be something that's over the counter in terms of just like walking up and paying for it at a Walgreens? And that's where I just don't understand the position of the FDA. And when you're saying that we're expecting to see new legislation in the hemp world, maybe you can expand on I know all the legislation that's pending right now for THC, but what's going on right now for hemp? What are you guys waiting for the government to change? And what's the progress report?
Well, obviously, there's the Farm Bill of 2023 that's starting to get talked about, and we'll see what happens with that. I know that at our conference in March, we're going to be talking about it quite a bit. We'll have some USDA folks out at that. Bill Richmond, who's the head of the hemp division, he's been participating in our events. And then, who is the head of the USDA right now? What's his name? He's actually buddies with the Colorado, he's with Polis and Michael Bennett. And anyway, we're trying to get him out. And, I think that the Farm Bill is going to be the most important part of legislation. As far as the CBD side of things, I know that the roundtable's got a couple of bills out there, and I can't remember what the letters and the numbers are on those.
Are you talking Tom Vilsack?
Yeah, Vilsack. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. He's head of the Department of Agriculture, I believe.
Yeah. And Vilsack, while he was kind of a Monsanto guy, or not kind of, a Monsanto guy, definitely under Obama, he's starting to shift his position a little bit and be receptive of regenerative agriculture and more focused on organic, and trying to really look at the devastation that conventional farming has done to our planet over the course of the last 50 years, particularly the last 30 years. And so I'm hopeful of that. I'm a big proponent of regenerative agriculture, and then how can hemp be part of that and rotate in and help clean the soil and sequester carbon and so forth. But when back to the legislation side of things, I just feel that, there's a lot of pressure from the hemp groups. You mentioned Hoban. I've worked with Bob for a long time, and, they've got their own direct funnel into the FDA. And, Bob said at my Southern Hemp Expo last year that he felt that by this time this year that there would be some movement. And, well, he was wrong, but that's okay. We've all tried to look into to the crystal ball and say, it's going to be 12 months or 18 months or 24 months. I mean, it's going to have to happen eventually, because you can't put it back in the bottle. I mean, the stuff is everywhere. And you can't shut it down. There's just no way to shut it down. So you have to regulate it and make sure that we're compliant, whatever those regulations are, and we're making the safest products possible for the consumer.
He's just brave enough to give an opinion.
Yeah. States have taken it upon themselves. The CDPHE here in Colorado, we can put it in food and beverages. And so we've got, CBD seltzers all over the place. And you can sell them in bars, and you can sell them in grocery stores, and it's everywhere in Colorado. It's everywhere in California now. It's everywhere after the California thing finally happened and it got approved. I know that was a challenging thing with the hemp side of things and the marijuana side of things, and the hemp people are still not happy about that. And Tennessee in the South, there's Florida, you can basically have everything, and that's where all the Delta 8 and the THCOs, and you got all that stuff, and you find that stuff in gas stations and convenience stores and all kinds of things. I just don't see how you shut it down.
Well, have you been to New York City recently?
Yeah.
New York City, it's, drugs are legal now. Like, essentially 100% legal. Like, there's stores, every city block right now in Manhattan, you can buy weed across the counter. It's crazy to me.
And they haven't even put their regulations in place, right?
No. These are all obviously illicit storefronts. They're not doing this with the blessing of the state. But, if I'm out there applying for a cannabis license right now in New York, I'm certainly wondering about the utility of paying for that license and for the infrastructure when, I know that I'm competing against an illicit market that no one in law enforcement seems to have any desire to shut down. They seem to have just given up in New York City and just said, okay, yeah, whatever, it's harmless. It's not just the D8s and the D9s coming from hemp. It's cannabis coming from the West Coast, and it's psilocybin and other things as well. I mean, it's name your kind of progressive drug of choice these days, and New York is probably the most progressive, but I'm wondering whether or not other states follow. I mean, look, the South, as you said, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, like all those states, you can walk into bodegas everywhere and get hemp-derived D8 and D9 products. And you can even buy them through the mail now. Like, people are shipping all over the country. So as a cannabis operator, you have to be sitting there looking at going, okay, what's going to be done about this? And why am I spending so much money to state regulators when they're not even protecting the market that we're in and doing anything about this? So it's always so strange for me to say, because I spent the majority of my adult life advocating for more progressive cannabis laws. And now for the first time, I'm regressive, where I'm like, okay, we've got to put some of this back in the bottle, because if not, you're going to destroy an industry and force all of it back to the illicit market, which is something that nobody wants. but for the outlaws, and hats off to the outlaws for getting us here. But now you got the chance to do it a different way. And for your industry, it basically puts a black eye on everything that's happening in progressive hemp farming because you're associated with something that you're not.
Right. Now, I can tell you the grain and fiber folks can't stand this stuff because, and there's another piece of legislation that we're trying to get incorporated into the Farm Bill is this grain and fiber exemption. So if you're going to grow for grain and fiber, you'd be exempted from the testing aspect of it, which is expensive, and then the FBI background checks. It's like if I'm a farmer and I want to grow corn and wheat and somebody wants me to grow hemp for them, and if they're going to pay me to grow 500 acres of hemp, I don't want to sit there and spend thousands of dollars on testing the THC levels if I'm buying certified seed that's, AOSCA certified. It's either come from Europe, it's come from Canada, or it's been bred here and it's got certified. Why do I need to test it? And I certainly don't want to get a background check and go through that whole process. It should be treated just like corn and soy. But, with the cannabinoid side of things, I get that there has to be a different regulatory framework if you're growing for that. And it's supposed to be 0.3%, which it could go to 1% in the Farm Bill, or it could go to 0.7% to eliminate some of the hot hemp that's out there. We're pushing for 1%. I think it should all be, there shouldn't even be a percentage. It should be THC irrelevant. It should all be end use. And if it's going to be a supplement that's going to Whole Foods or GNC, if it can only have 1 milligram of THC per serving, or 2 or 2.5 or 3 or 0, even if it was that and it was broad spectrum, then that's how it should be regulated. It should be end use. Where is it going? If it's going to a dispensary, it can be this. If it's going to the grocery store, and it has to be this. If it's going into a wall or a guitar or a piece of paper, who gives a fuck if there was 30% THC in the waste material that ends up in a wall? It's like, if we're being sensible, which I know that humans really, and politics and that stuff is not really sensible and common sense, it should just be end use. But we're going to make it complicated, and there's going to be 10 different lanes that we're going to have to follow one way or another.
But for deadheads and fish heads, you're going to have to make sure you put a good warning up then that says don't smoke this wall, like the Dead did with their hats when they sent out the hemp hats.
Exactly.
Did you ever see those, Rob? The Terrapin Station hemp hats?
Yeah. It used to be on the tag saying, like, in small print, don't smoke this hat. I mean, look, I remember like when hemp clothing stores, I had a good buddy of mine back in the mid 90s at a hemp clothing store in Burlington, Vermont. And like the cops would mill around his store all the time. And we're like, buddy, he sells clothing. What is it you think you're going to bust him for? It's shipping across legal hemp fiber from Canada that has been able to ship for years. And it's crazy to me, just the misconception of what hemp is. And as you said, Larry, if you go back in the history of the United States, there's a requirement at a certain point to grow it. And then from what Morris is saying, here's another one that I think we should probably dig into just a little bit more, which is the regenerative properties. You touched on it, but I don't think a lot of people out there understand that if you're trying to regenerate soil and you're trying to add nutrient back in, or you're trying to leach a Superfund site, probably the best crop you can plant is hemp. And there's good things about that and bad things. Good things that it certainly does its job. Bad things that there was for a while unscrupulous guys that were trying to take that hemp that was being used for regenerative purposes and sell it when it was absorbing everything that was in that soil. So you're watching guys take regenerative grown hemp in China that was being used to soak up bad leaching fields essentially, and then migrate to the United States and try to sell for whatever purposes. So I mean, I'm guessing you've run into the charlatans in the industry as well that don't take organic certification or OMRI certification all that seriously as they're working their hemp products. But I've got to think there's sort of white hat, bad hat, or black hats, happening in your side of the industry as well right now.
Oh yeah, there's no question. There's good actors and there's bad actors, just like there is in the THC space.
This is fascinating, and I love hemp. I could keep talking about this all day. Have you guys delved at all into the elections, Rob?
We talked about the election for the first 10 or 15 minutes before you got on. So we covered the losses. We already shared our disgust for our friend Kristi Noem in South Dakota, who claims she would actually this time let it go through. It's easy to say when you're playing armchair quarterback the day after and the thing's already failed. Oh, too bad, guys. Would have signed it into law this time.
what's with the people of South Dakota? Their governor took it away. They approved it. She took it away. And then are they just like blind sheep and the governor didn't like it, so we're not going to approve it this time?
I don't know. Maybe they're just saving up all their vice for, alcohol use at Sturgis. It's hard to say. I don't know what happens in that state.
They're like anything. They're all stupid. It's like Arkansas, right? That they got, we have real health concerns. It's like, you have health concerns. Did you see the study that came out last week that said 1 out of 5 teenage deaths last year was alcohol related? 1 out of 5 teenage deaths in a country with guns and suicide and everything else. And people don't wear their seatbelts. 1 out of 5 teenage deaths is alcohol related. And they push that stuff like it's the breakfast of champions, and they'll give you grief forever if you suggest smoke marijuana instead.
It's a great point. That was someone brought with me today, Larry. I was touring a facility, and we were talking about child-proof wrapping and tamper-proof packaging. And it's like, okay, you've got tamper-proof packaging for a 5 milligram edible. You're fighting to get this thing open, right? There's no tamper-proof packaging on a bottle of vodka. There's no child-proofing. Like, you drink a bottle of vodka and you die. I mean, plain and simple. We talked about toxicity a minute ago. You drink a fifth of vodka and very likely you die, right? You take an edible or 10, yeah, you might have a really unpleasant experience. It might suck. You might end up, going to the hospital, thinking that someone's trying to kill you, but you're not going to die, right? At least not from the toxicity of the substance itself. You might do something stupid after taking it, but look, one of them was treated like plutonium, and one of them was treated like, yeah, let's throw a screw cap on this thing and have at it. There isn't even like just a push down, like, the way you have to have for to open up a pharmaceutical bottle. There isn't even anything like that to make it like child-proof, tamper-proof. Like any 4-year-old can get into a bottle of vodka or a bottle of scotch, So it doesn't make sense to me that one is so ingrained in our the fabric of our society that there is no safeguards against it. Like zero whatsoever. Like, you don't tell people like, oh, you got to properly store your alcohol. It doesn't make sense to me.
I agree. Although I'm sure, and there is merit, I suppose, to the position that, a gummy is a lot more appealing to a child. A cupcake or a cookie that's, infused, at least on its face, could attract a child. Yes, could they be attracted to a bottle of booze? No question about it, especially with all the funky labels they put on them these days. But I agree.
Yeah, I've got small kids, and never once, when I'm sitting there drinking a glass of wine or a bottle of beer or, a margarita, never once when I go, hey, you want some as a joke? My kids are like, no, get that away from you. Like they want nothing to do with alcohol as small children. Whereas if there's an alcoholic gummy, that'd be a real fear of mine. And that's a legitimate comparison. So, but yeah, we did cover the election quite a bit. We certainly covered the fact that 2 out of 5 states passed. The 2 most important states population-wise passed. We also talked about the fact that we very likely are going to see some incremental change coming from some other states based on the outcome of this election. And then the big question was what happens with major pieces of legislation at a federal level, based on the outcome of this, which we still even today don't know the answer to who is going to be in control of the House or who's going to be in control of the Senate, and we likely won't know that until probably the first or second week of December. So we've got some time to wait before final decisions are made, but obviously we're going into a lame duck session that imagines some big decisions being made by the Dems while they still have a mandate. And I don't know where you come out on this. Morris and I kind of pontificated a little bit, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well.
Well, first of all, I have to give a quick shout out to Missouri. Morris doesn't necessarily know I'm from St. Louis, or born and raised originally, and I spend most of my life trying to deflect the fact I'm from Missouri, except for the Cardinals. But here is something that's just great, right? I mean, when Rob on our show last week, when we were looking at the article that was kind of assessing the chances, Missouri had dipped to the negative. There was the latest poll had showed that it had gone from strong support to maybe not quite enough support, and I could not be happier to see that the people of Missouri, notwithstanding some of the people they send to Washington, D.C., had the common sense and the good vision and judgment to go ahead and pass this statute. It's very, very important for all the reasons we've talked about. Marijuana exists in Missouri. It exists all over the place. So like every other state, they're smart to get on top of it and be a part of it rather than trying to pretend that it doesn't happen like some of these other states. We were talking about the Dakotas and Arkansas that they couldn't see their way clear to it. On a federal level, I think that it's like anything else, that where we're asking the populace to shift the popular view, right? We did it with gay marriage and went from being wildly unpopular to wildly popular. And I think that we will see something similar with marijuana and all forms of cannabis over time, because what we've just said before, we can sit here and say this because we pay attention. Other people don't. At what point after we have adult use marijuana is everyone going to say, okay, we were wrong about the fact that it'll do X, Y, and Z because it hasn't done that yet. Okay, we were wrong that it would kill people. It hasn't killed people yet. Are people ever going to say that? Is there ever going to be a point in time, right, where they'll acknowledge it? I don't know, but certainly when you get more than a majority, a clear majority, and this, these days elections are decided by 51%. If you get 55 to 60 or even more percent of the country saying we favor legal cannabis, at some point the politicians have to take notice. The Supreme Court, if it ever gets up to them, has to take notice like they do on every other issue. And, they all saw their way clear eventually to, allowing gay marriage and a number of other issues that have come before the court. And, hopefully if these issues ever came up once they come up to Congress, and if anybody challenges it and tries to pull a Christie Nome once it's passed and go back and say, no, it really shouldn't count, that people will stop and take a look and say, you know what? Sorry, you guys aren't in the majority at all anymore. Not that legal issues should be decided on the majority, but this is not really a legal issue. This is even more than a lifestyle issue. It dives right back into personal freedoms. People Colorado is, a great state because personal freedoms on guns, but they're right there with personal freedoms on marijuana. So, I'm not such a big fan of one. I'm a huge fan of the other, and I can appreciate the sentiment that they bring to the table with that. And I think eventually we're going to see more and more people stop and say, hey, wait, why can't I smoke? Why is my kid getting busted for something that's safer than the alcohol that they could probably be drinking, walking down the street, and the cops would just wave to them?
Well, when it comes to this freedom thing, I still don't understand when, these Republicans, the DeSantis's and the Texas Abbotts, it's like freedom, 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 but it's like not when it comes to a woman's right to choose and not when it comes to cannabis. It's like all guns, yes. We can talk about freedom, freedom of speech and no CRT, and we can say whatever the fuck we want to say, but, no freedom to choose. We'll see what happens with, you brought up the gay marriage thing. If that ends up back in the Supreme Court and they say, you know what, we're just going to kick this back to the states like we did with Roe versus Wade.
I would not be surprised at all if it happens that way. Oberfell very likely is going to get challenged under this Supreme Court, but in a different way. I mean,
you think so?
Yeah, I do. But I think that there's a difference between Roe v. Wade, the way it was settled, and the way that Oberfell was settled. So the distinction that was made and the reason it got sent back to the states from a legal perspective, the first ruling, the Roe v. Wade ruling, opened the door for that, and the Supreme Court kind of kicked it down. So there are legal distinctions between the two, but I think given the composition of the court, expect to see everything get challenged if they think they can push it through. So, we'll see.
Loving versus Virginia, anyone?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the case that says states can't stop interracial marriages, but yet we have Clarence Thomas, black man married to a white woman, debating that this right of privacy and hands off me exists. Well, it can't exist for one and not for the other. And eventually he's going to be put in a position where he's going to have to figure that out. And I don't want to be in the room when it happens because people might get hurt. But, that's all just, but look at what's happening. And, far be it from me to beat up on people, but Uvalde, Texas voted overwhelmingly for Abbott and Republicans, notwithstanding the fact that Abbott's response to the shooting there was beyond horrific. But that doesn't stop people in the state. And I will pick on Texas because they deserve it. One of the issues in the election this year was lack of access for handicapped voters. Their governor is handicapped, for God's sakes. And he was making it hard for people who are handicapped, who are Democrats, to have access to vote. That when we're dealing with that kind of mindset, that's the time when, you know what I do? I get stoned and check out because that's too much for me. Well,
one thing we haven't touched on yet from this election cycle, and I think we should, is we now have probably the most pro-cannabis senator we've ever had in the U.S. Senate in John Fetterman. So, whether or not that makes a major difference and whether or not, the composition of the Senate ends up being 50-50 or 51-49, coming out of this, we'll see after Georgia. It really probably doesn't make much difference on the national stage. But we do have someone that has been probably the single biggest advocate to cannabis rights and to cannabis progression. that we've seen while he was lieutenant governor under Tom Wolf's governorship in Pennsylvania. And we've also got Josh Shapiro that's now sitting in the governor's role. I mean, he's taken over from Wolf. And I think that Shapiro and Fetterman, if you were to say what state is most likely to see a major change happening soon, those two guys, I think, are certainly going to push something through. And I think that very likely, with the win that you just saw Shapiro have, I mean, granted, Mastriano was a relatively flawed candidate on the Republican side, but that was a decisive victory in a state. I mean, not quite as decisive as DeSantis' victory was or Abbott's victory was. I mean, those were far wider in terms of what the vote was than I think most would have expected going into yesterday or the election. But Shapiro certainly handily won his race against Mastriano. So do we think Pennsylvania is going to now follow suit with New York and Connecticut and New Jersey? I would say yes.
I think they have to, don't they? And we've talked about the power of, how can you be the only state out there in the whole New York, Massachusetts, everything, triangle where everything's, and be the one state that's not doing it. You'll get killed. And Philadelphia is huge. If New Jersey has it, quick shout out to my good buddy Steve Shane, who has an office in Philly and an office in Jersey. Why? Because it's right across the river. That's a little too easy for people. You can't allow all that business to shift out of the state. And I think you're right. I think Fetterman and Shapiro will push to make Pennsylvania an adult use state. So,
hey, we're running, pretty close to the end of our episode, but I wanted to make sure that Morris had a chance to talk about his guitar line as well, because you've got one of the more interesting things out there we haven't even talked about at all. So let's get off politics for a minute. Let's talk about some cool music shit, even if it's not really a Grateful Dead episode today. Tell us about what you got going on, man.
So I started Silver-Mountain Hemp Guitars. I guess it was I came up with the name in 2018, and but there was a company in Canada called Canadian Hemp Guitars that had launched in 2013 and started to build some hemp composite-based guitars. I got one at NoCo Hemp Expo in 2015, and I started talking to those guys, see if they would custom make me some guitars. And they were also making some ukuleles at the time, again, using a hemp composite material. So we started making some guitars, and the guys were more or less hobbyists, and they just didn't have the time to really put into it for what I needed to have them do. And I came across this other group, the French brothers, who were working with a group called the Hard Truckers, making guitar cabinets. And the Hard Truckers, the guy who I can't remember what John's last name was, but they were building guitar cabinets for Jimmy Herring and Derek Trucks and a variety of the jam band guys, Colonel Bruce Hampton. And so they were making these birchwood guitar cabinets, and they had made a few hemp cabinets back in like 2018 or 2008, 2009, and they were getting board product from China, which then became inconsistent, and they couldn't make the cabinets consistently until we started producing some stuff here in the U.S. I came up with a board product that I got to them, made a whole bunch of guitar cabinets, and we loaded them with Tone Tubby hemp cone speakers. And Tone Tubby's a company that's been making hemp cone speakers since, I believe, 2000, and they're based out of San Francisco and go to the NAMM show every year. And lots of guitar players have used their speaker cones. Derek Trucks, Santana, James Hetfield from Metallica. They've had a bunch of people use them over the years. What's his name? Warren Haynes. So I had the guitar cabinet guys start making me some hemp body guitars, and we started utilizing hemp wood, which is a company out of Kentucky that's taken stocks, compressing it into a board product that you can make flooring and cabinets with. And so we've been making hemp body guitars and guitar cabinets and amplifiers now, and figured out how to do it. And we can custom shop pretty much anything at this point. It's been a little bit quiet the last year and a half after COVID. I haven't had as much extra money to dump into my passion. I've been trying to keep everything else afloat, but they're cool guitars. They sound great. The amps sound great, and there's a future for hemp guitars.
How do we find you?
silver-mountain-hemp.com.
Very cool. Very, very cool, man.
And it was in honor of Ronnie James Dio, the man on the Silver Mountain. So here's to Ronnie.
Everything should be
Even though Ronnie's not a guitar player, he did play with Blackmore, and they did record "Man on the Silver Mountain" back in 1974.
My roommate in college, for 7 years after college, his first concert ever was a Ronnie James Dio show. So shout out to my buddy Ed Krebser. But definitely got him on the heavy metal train at a young age. Coming out of Woodstock, New York, filled with a bunch of hippies. For him to have his first show, he grew up with members of the band and members of name the artist, John Sebastian, and his first show was a Dio show. So that's fantastic. Way to honor Ronnie James, man.
Yep. And bless his soul, he got taken out by cancer too, which is not a good thing. And he was young. He was like 65 or 66. You would have thought that Ozzy would have gone before him, but Ozzy's still alive and kicking.
Yeah, I don't know how Ozzy and Keith Richards are freaks of nature. How either one of them are still on. Steven Tyler, I think, as well. So give us your dates also for NoCo. So anyone that's listening knows how to find NoCo now that it's down in, as you said, in SoCo. When and where, and any other information you want to provide on that one too.
Yep. So that's March 29th through the 31st at the Broadmoor Resort in Colorado Springs, which is the longest standing 5-star resort in the world. Once Forbes started their 5-star rating back in 1960, the Broadmoor has hit it every single year. 5,000 acre resort, brand new convention and meeting space, beautiful facility to grow out an international hemp and environmental convention. We're still in the infancy of bringing hemp back into the American agriculture system, into the supply chain. So I look at, we're just starting, we've got 20, 30 years to go before we're going to hit our peak. And hopefully we'll get there, because we need to make some changes as a society and as a species when it comes to how we treat our earth and how we treat each other. Otherwise, we're not going to be around that much longer.
That's true too. Is the Broadmoor, is that the hotel they used in The Shining?
That's the Stanley. That's up in Estes Park.
The Stanley. Okay.
Dude, you got to know your Colorado hotels, man. You got to know your classic monster places. Yeah, it's.
I know. I flunked that one. Before we check off, Rob, let me just say a couple of things. First of all, I know we didn't have a lot of time to talk about music today. There's always great Grateful Dead shows to talk to play, but we don't always get a guy like Morris Beegle, and quite frankly, that was far more interesting, I think, than any music we might have come up with. However, live music continues on, and even though everybody's listening to this on Monday, so this will be the weekend that just passed, on Friday night, I'm going to get to go to Space in Evanston and see Ben Ottewell and Ian Ball from Gomez. Very excited about that. I was always a big Gomez fan. And then on Saturday night, I'm going to see my first full-blown Humphreys show. I did see them at the Sacred Rose Festival and caught their set there, which was very nice and a lot of fun. But all the Humphreys heads that I was there with said, but you have to see a show. You just have to go see a show. So this Saturday night, I'm going with my buddies Rick and Joel over to see Humphreys at the Vic Theater in Chicago, which is a legendary theater on the north side of the city that we all like, right across the street from the Uptown, which to my chagrin, I never had a chance to see a show in, because by the time I got on the bus, they were already shutting it down. But great live music on tap. And then, Morris, are you going to be at MJ Biz coming up here?
I am going to be there. And I do want to say, because since you came on late, I was asked if I had ever seen The Dead before. And I saw The Dead in 1984 at Red Rocks, which I guess is a show that you were at.
Oh, wow.
Right?
I was there in 1984. Which night were you there?
I'm not sure. I went with a buddy of mine who was a Deadhead, and I was a metalhead at the time. But I saw The Dead there.
That question was essentially a prelude to, were you there for the hailstorm?
I did that. I was not there on the hailstorm.
Right. Were you there the night of the hailstorm? Were you there the night of the Dear Mr. Fantasy, or the night they played U.S. Blues 2 days too early?
Yeah. So I'm not sure. There was no hailstorm, but I did see Humphreys McGee at Red Rocks this summer, and that was the first time I've seen him, and they were great.
No, I'm really excited about that. Well, hopefully, Morris, will have a chance to meet up with you at MJ Biz, which is coming up just here in a couple of days. Rob and I will be there. Dan will be out there. We are actually taping the next episode of our show on Friday. This coming Friday at 12 noon Pacific time from Podcast Row in the Las Vegas Convention Center at MJ Biz. So any of our fans out there, the multitudes, if you want to come by and say hello, talk Grateful Dead, talk marijuana, share a joint.
Don't say that, Larry. We're going to get mobbed.
Well, I know, but Dan's got security worked out, so we should be okay.
I hope so. With all our multitudes of fans, I don't know how we're going to get through the door now that they know where we're going to be. That was a huge mistake, man.
There could be like 30,000 or 40,000 of your fans there.
Way more than that, Morris. Way more than that.
Well, we'll connect in Vegas and we'll fire one up.
Yeah, I will look forward to that. Absolutely. And I'm going to let Rob sign off and just say goodbye to everybody. Have a great week. Fun talking to Morris. Fun talking about all sorts of good stuff. And enjoy your hemp responsibly. Rob, take us home.
Well, thanks to Morris Beagle for showing up, and thanks for walking us through what's happening in the hemp industry. And to everyone out there, thank you for voting this past week. As we said, the week before, such an important thing to do. So for everyone out there that actually put their ballot in or went to a polling place, thank you for doing your civic duty as an American and getting your vote in there. It is hugely important, no matter where you stand on the issues, to make your voice heard. With that, signing out from Southern California, but in the spirit of the Grateful Dead, just here to remember and remind you that the future is here. We are it, and we are on our own. Take it away.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To check out more great cannabis podcasts, go to PodConx.com. Here's a preview of one of our other shows.
I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your cannabis business podcast, The Talking Hedge, and newest member on PodConx. So come on over and check out The Talking Hedge. We talk about business news, interviews, investments, events, all that stuff. So come nerd out with me over at The Talking Hedge. You can find me at thetalkinghedgepodcast.com or on all your favorite podcast platforms. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.